think from what I could see after the whole situation with the PBS situation, from what I could see, you really were intentional about independent media, and you had your YouTube channel, and now I can see you on Instagram. I feel like if you're paying attention to what's going on in these streets in Minneapolis, and you're not here, and all you have is online, there's no way that you can miss what you're doing. But I wanted to ask you this. I grew up on PBS. It's a very important part of my household.
Me too.
I've heard you talk about in your video. You spoke about this, what public broadcasting has meant for us, and particularly, I'm a kid from the '70s. I grew up on Sesame Street, so it's it's weaved into my upbringing. And recently, with the Trump administration taking funding away from PBS, PBS has been framed, I think rightfully so, as a victim of this MAGA campaign. So a lot of people have been celebratory of what PBS represents. And I think in your video, you said, I wouldn't be saying this if I didn't care. And you talked about how it's not about being against the idea of PBS or not wanting to be down with them, but you wanted them to include your Blackness in what you're doing. I watched you go from what I think is just a journalist to an activist journalist in real time. Can you talk to us a little bit about that whole experience?
Well, the beginning of me being introduced to PBS was a show called America from Scratch. So each show started with, if we didn't have state lines, would we have them if we made America from scratch? And it was all these things with would we reset the age limit for voting? It was all these ideas that kind of lightly push the idea of civic engagement and what it can mean. And somebody in the room said, well, can we do an episode saying if we started America from scratch, would we give the land back to the indigenous folks? And one of the producers was like, I don't know if we can go there. Right. And to my understanding, I mean, there's limitations to where things can go. We talked about that earlier a little bit off camera, is that when you have a foundational business or entity, it only has limitations to where it can go for its own interests. And I experienced that firsthand while at PBS. And the longest story short was when I would go there, it's a very white space in Twin Cities. I'm sure it's different in other spaces. It's a very white space. And it didn't really want to frame any of those questions. And so I was given words to say, and then I would say them on camera. And that was it. And so they had a podcast where, I would lead some stuff and I would lead forums and whatnot. But when George Floyd was murdered, and I said, hey, is anything going to be said about this? And they were like, well, we're not a news network. We're not a breaking news network. And I was like, well, it's been over a week. It's not breaking news anymore. And breaking news would mean within the first 24 hours. And so at that point I was like, can I be here for this next segment that was going to be news from scratch? It was going to be how to interpret news. And when a Black-owned distillery came out and said something more palpable and definitive and detailed about what happened to George Floyd, rather than Twin Cities Public Television, that's when I was like, I got to back out of this. Because even if a distillery is saying something that has visibly no skin in the game of, news, I had to back out and figure out what this uncertainty that Nakima alluded to was going to be. And so that's when we started talking to people on the street. That's when we started talking about, what does it feel like to you that Target has been, that's been looted, or whatever people want to frame it as. What does that mean to you? And then we started just interviewing people in the street and talking to people. And then that's when the activist journalism really started. So
I applaud you for doing it, because I started out rapper, journalist, activist, but when I got to doing my activism, I was taking it too far. So I couldn't really identify as a journalist no more.
Yeah. I mean, in too far can mean different things for different people. There was a lot of learning in the beginning. For me in 2020, everybody's beginning is different. But some people start wilding out in marches, and other people would be like, "Whoa, bro, I'm not arrestable. I can't get another." Not everybody understood that right off. And I was like, oh.
We had that conversation yesterday, ironically enough.
Yeah, I moved from artist into the journalist space when I started doing the podcasting. And it took me a while to embrace that. But after a few interviews, I'm like, no, I'm in the journalist space because I'm doing journalist work.
Yeah.
But as a fan of journalism and as someone who supports journalism, I don't see how you can be a journalism. I don't see how you can be a journalist without eventually becoming an activist journalist. because the job is to tell the truth about any given situation. And if that's part of the job, there's no way to tell the truth without siding with marginalized people.
But you don't feel that way about like rapping? Like
I do. That's why I rap the way I rap.
Some cats, I thought, listening to people like you before I was even thought about as a real rapper, and I'm like, okay, cool. This is what we are supposed to do. This is the baseline standard of what we're going to be doing. Like anything, it can go further, but this is at least a baseline premise to function from.
Or at least it's a necessary component, right? I have conscious rap. Some people rap about the girls. Some people rap about the money. Some people rap about drugs. We can all exist because we're multifaceted people. All these things are necessary, but to just have just one style of rap dominate is always going to be a problem.
And more so what I even mean is I thought people talking about stuff was a baseline standard, like, just having content that was worthy of being heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, not everybody has that, and it's to the extent of when people start, I want to say mitigating, when people start limiting themselves from the truth in their content or even their lyrics, the question then becomes, okay, what are they protecting? Or what are they being willfully ignorant of? And then when that happens, then it gets to this point of you start, that conversation, I don't know how far that can go for some people because it feels like an attack on their identity. So I remember we were doing an action out in Stillwater, which was a sundown town, for lack of a better term, not too long ago. And some of the white folks out there, when, we were speaking about, in 2020, June of 2020, about cops, they felt personally attacked because their identity is tied to this idea, an institution of policing that protects them. And to tell somebody, actually, that's not true, it shatters their world. It flips it upside down. And so when you see those responses or people like as lightly as just like, removing the truth a little bit from their lyrics or their content, it's like, okay, then what are we protecting here?
It seems like white people's relationship with the police in America, particularly because of how the police started with the slave patrols and all that, is that they feel like the police are not there for everybody, but the police are there to be their personal bodyguards to protect their level of convenience or their lack of self-understanding or lack of accountability.
Exactly. And that's why you see so many of these videos with white people that are like, well, I'm calling the cops.
Yeah.
I have yet to see, I'm sure there's some Reddit thread or some playlist on YouTube somewhere where there's like, black folks being like, well, I'm calling the police. And I have yet to see it. But the thing recently, we had some people on a bridge in, I think was Richfield, that had just had signs that said ice out.
Yeah.
And a white woman came on and said, this is so disrespectful. I'm calling the cops. I can't believe you're doing this right now. And she said, my father didn't fight in World War II and my brother didn't almost die in Vietnam for this. When in fact, they did fight for the First Amendment. So like, this is what people are out here doing.
And that's stolen valor right there as well.
100%. Yeah. It's like she fought for it, but what are we talking about right now? Like, what does that mean? So yeah, people white folks do feel that there is, their relationship has been some entitlement to, they protect us. And maybe the quiet part that's being said out loud is they're not here to protect everybody. Which side